Good evening, everybody. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, as well as elders past, present and emerging. State Library acknowledges all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and their continuing connection to land, and as custodians of stories for millennia. We're inspired by this tradition in our work to share and preserve Queensland's memory for future generations. Good evening, everybody. My name's Louise Denoon, and I'm the Executive Director of Public Libraries and Engagement here at the State Library of Queensland. I'd like to welcome you to No Friend But the Mountains with Behrouz Boochani and Omid Tofighian as part of the Talking Ideas series. This month, Talking Ideas explores ideas around power, speaking truth to power, and the freedom that writing can provide. Next week, Adele Ferguson will be here exploring the events and scandals that brought about the Banking Royal Commission with the Courier Mail's political editor, Dennis Atkins. Tonight, Behrouz will be joining us via live stream from Manus Island with his colleague, collaborator and translator, Omid Tofighian. And they'll join us shortly on stage along with Cathy van Extel. Please be aware we're working with technology tonight. In the unlikely event that the technology fails, Cathy and Omid will continue the conversation and we'll get Behrouz back online as soon as possible. We have tested it before you've come in and we are very hopeful. The State Library is a respected cultural institution and we provide a safe and welcoming space for everyone. Tonight's event is part of our Talking Ideas series, which aims to entertain, inspire and foster debate, addressing issues that inform our times and shape our lives. Speakers at our events hold a wide range of views and come from diverse backgrounds. Similarly, there may be differing points of view amongst our audience tonight, and I encourage you to listen respectfully. Following the conversation, there'll be an opportunity to ask questions. As you came in tonight, you'll have noticed some rolling images from State Library's online digital collection. They were a selection of portraits taken during a Brisbane celebration of World Refugee Day. They celebrate the diversity of Brisbane residents and are just a snippet of the Queensland stories you can explore in our collection. Behrouz Boochani is a Kurdish-Iranian writer, journalist, scholar, cultural advocate and filmmaker. In 2013, he was detained on Manus Island and has been there ever since. He has worked tirelessly to give voice to those detained on Manus. In 2018, he realised his award-winning book, No Friend But the Mountains, Writing from Manus Prison. Omid is a lecturer, researcher and community advocate, combining philosophy with interests in citizen media, popular culture, displacement and discrimination. He holds positions at universities here in Australia and in Europe and is the campaign manager for Why Is My Curriculum White, Australasia. A writer himself, he worked with Behrouz to translate his book from Farsi to English. Cathy van Extel is a journalist with more than 25 years' experience in radio reporting. Many of you are probably familiar with her from Radio National at the moment. Presenting and documentary making. In 2001, she was awarded a Walkley Commendation for her ABC coverage of the September 11 terrorist attack. Please welcome Behrouz, Omid and Cathy.
Well, thank you very much, Louise, and welcome, Omid. Thank you. It's my very great pleasure to introduce Behrouz Boochani today. In 2013, Behrouz reached Christmas Island after surviving his second perilous boat journey, and it was just 4 days after Kevin Rudd introduced the Manus and Nauru policy. Behrouz is a Kurdish-Iranian writer, journalist, poet, film producer, and human rights advocate. In fact, there's a long list of other things that Behrouz does. He's also an associate professor of the University of New South Wales. In Iran, Behrouz achieved a master's degree in political science, political geography, and geopolitics, And it's through this academic prism, partly at least, that he wrote No Friend But the Mountains, which is an extraordinary book. If you haven't read it, you must get it. It's garnered a number of awards, as Louise mentioned, including the 2019 Victorian Prize for Literature, which is Australia's richest literary prize. Behrouz remains in offshore detention on Manus Island, so he's only free to talk to us today via video link. And as Louise mentioned, there have been a few technical issues which we're told are probably cleared up, so hopefully the video link will hold, but please bear with us if there are any technical issues. Please welcome Behrouz. Now, I should mention also that there are cameras, and Behrouz can see us, so he can see both Omid and myself, but he can also see the audience. So perhaps you could welcome and wave, Behrouz.
Yeah, I can see you. Thank you. Thank you.
Behrouz, I'm going to start the questioning with you. The way this book came about is a story in itself, and I know that you'd been writing articles, first anonymously and then under your own name. At what point did you decide to write this book, and can you take us through the process, because I know it was a very difficult one?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me today. I would like to say hello to everyone. I think, as you mentioned, for years I was working as a journalist from Manus Island, and I was trying to convey this, that how the system is torturing people, how the Australian government is running this prison camp. And you know, I should mention this, that so far 12 people died in Manus Island and in Nauru, and hundreds of people damaged physically and mentally. So we have been living under a very cruel system. But for years, I tried to, you know, I was working, I was publishing journalistic articles, and also I did many interviews, you know, actually hundreds or perhaps 1,000 interviews over the past 6 years. But always, you know, I thought that still people who are following this exile policy, they don't have idea about how the life is inside the prison camp. And still, you know, a big part of this system, people don't understand it. And my understanding is that this system, this prison system, is very complicated, and they use a word called, you know, a concept, systematic torture. So that's why I think the journalism language was not capable that I tell this story and share this story and this tragedy. I relied on artistic language, so I made a movie, Choka, Please Tell Us the Time. So it is available on internet, so people can watch it. It is 90 minutes about the life inside the prison camp. And then I decided with literature, you know, in literature language, which is a free language, which is a strong language and a powerful language. And my aim was to help the readers and take them into the prison camp. Yeah, sorry, someone. So I wanted to take the readers into the prison camp to understand how the life is and how the system works, and how you know, this system, you know, designed to torture people and take people identity. So that's why I rely on literature language. And another thing I would like to mention is that a long time ago, I could write a simple book. I could write 3 books in journalism language. But I think I thought that it's better I just tell this story with in literature language, and that's why. So we ended up in this book.
Behrouz, explain to us how
Sorry,
you went about.
Tell you, yeah, another part of your question was about the process of writing. So the process of writing, I think it was very hard because I this book, the whole book, in WhatsApp. In WhatsApp, because I remember on that time we couldn't have access to phone, so it was illegal. I should mention this, that after 3 years, the PNG Supreme Court ordered this, that keeping people in prison is illegal. And so we had access to phone after 3 years that we were there. So I didn't feel safe with the authorities. Each 2 weeks, each 3 weeks, the guards, hundreds guards, attack our room. They used to attack our room at morning at 5 o'clock, 4 o'clock, and wake us up and search our bodies, search our properties, and so it was not safe if I would write this book on the paper. And so many times we lost our properties. So that's why I think the best way for me was to write it on WhatsApp and send it text by text to Omid. And so it was a very long process and hard process, but I am happy that we did it on WhatsApp, because the important thing for me was to save my word.
I'll bring Omid into this conversation now, Behrouz. Omid, you're an academic and a community advocate, but before this process, you weren't really known as a translator as such.
Not at all.
So this is an extraordinary project to become involved in. We've just heard from Behrouz that he's WhatsApping, texting large passages, and it was in Farsi. So tell us a little bit about how you came to know Behrouz and how you approached this project.
Thank you for raising this issue. Actually, when I hear my name associated with translation, I think, are they talking about me? It's still really hard for me to grasp the fact that I'm involved in this, and I'm so deeply involved in translation and thinking theoretically about the process and the act of translation, the discipline of translation. So originally, I think my first experiences with translation were growing up and translating or interpreting for my parents. And I never really realized that this was developing a skill over many, many years. So once I became involved in working with people who experienced displacement and exile, and then finally reading Behrouz's work, I realized that this is something that I could use for in different ways, in more progressive ways, in ways that can actually create transformation. So I think it was the beginning of 2016, I read one of Behrouz's articles in The Guardian. And it was the first time that he published with the Guardian, and Manus Mansubi, his first translator, helped him with that particular article. So when I read it, when I found it online, and I read it, and I thought, one, there's something extremely special about this. I could tell there was philosophical depth to it. There was a very keen and well-trained political mind, intellectual mind. There was also something very powerful in terms of emotion and in terms of a literary technique in the article as well. So I could see all these different layers appearing, and I thought, I've really got to let this person know that I appreciate his work and it's had a profound effect on me. It's something that, for me, was unprecedented. So I contacted Behrouz. We started a slow conversation through Facebook, and then we moved to WhatsApp. And then he said, when he found out I was an academic, he said, would you be able to help me translate if I have trouble finding someone? I said, look, I'm not a translator, but I'll certainly do my best. I translated one article, the response was good, and here we are.
It's a very complex book, and there's narrative, prose, poetry, there's analysis. How would you describe the style of this book, and how did you approach it then as his translator?
Another very interesting question, and hard to answer, but I've tried my best to come up with the right kind of terms or the right kind of framework to analyse what Behrouz has done. First of all, I refer to what he's produced as an anti-genre. I think the fact that he mixes all of these different styles and techniques and structures together resists any kind of categorization or any kind of classification, and actually requires us to rethink what we understand as genre. So I think what he's doing is actually an anti-genre. The other thing that I thought about was that he's bringing in dream visions and flashbacks and flash forwards, and he creates a particular kind of world, or tries to draw us into a particular kind of experience, a lived experience. And so I thought the best way to think about that is using the concept of horrific surrealism, a kind of mixture of surrealism, a very context or culturally based kind of surrealism, which actually goes back to his Kurdish heritage, and a mixture of psychological horror or horror realism. And I thought this idea of horrific surrealism really encompasses what he's done in terms of an anti-genre.
It struck me that the poetry in some sections was, sparse as it may be, was far more powerful at times than the narrative. It was extraordinary.
Well, there's an interesting point that that really needs to be elaborated on, and I mentioned this in the translator's note, but Behrouz wrote the whole book in Farsi prose. So all through text message, he was basically writing prose. But Farsi is a very melodic or rhythmic or poetic language. So it comes across as being very similar to poetry. And also there are a lot of references to the poetic tradition and also the oral tradition, different oral traditions in Iran. So when I was trying to translate, I noticed that the sentences were extremely long. I mean, Farsi is an Indo-European language, so similar to Romance languages and also German. Sentences are very long with the subject at the beginning and the main verb right at the end. And in between, there are a lot of different clauses. So I thought if I translate this with the same sentence structure, it's going to be very difficult to read in English. It's going to lose all of its melody, all of its poetic resonance, and it's not going to be interesting. So I thought I'd need to split this up, which meant I had needed to repeat subjects, verbs, adverbs, adjectives, phrases. And after about the second review, I noticed that there are certain passages that actually sound like poetry. So we thought, why not? Translate Farsi prose into English poetry.
It works. Behrouz, can I bring you back into the conversation about your aim to educate Australians about really what was going on in Manus prison, as you name it. In the book, you detail multiple ways that asylum seekers were being dehumanised, or an attempt to dehumanise, and also pitted against each other and psychologically broken down. And you've used the term the hierarchical system. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yes, exactly. So, the hierarchical system, the hierarchical is actually that I used to describe the system and how this system designed to take our identity, our individuality, our humanity and morality, and create hate and force people to hate each other, force people to forget about morality, to forget about humanity, and reduce them to only some numbers. For example, my name in this system is MEG45, so they never call me Behrouz, or they call me MEG45. So they reduce people to only some numbers. So when this system works like this, of course, it's okay for a week or 2 weeks that people survive in a system like this, but not for 6 years, not for 4 years, not for 5 years. So that's why, I use this term, hierarchical system, to describe how the systematic torture is and what is systematic torture mean. And another thing I would like to mention is that the hierarchical system and this concept help us to understand Manus prison system beyond this prison, and we develop this system to other part of Australian society. And there are some similarity between a Manus prison system and other structures in Australia, like the universities. So the universities, I think, are very similar with the Manus prison system. And in so many ways, we can say they are very similar. And also, the military places, in the hospital, in the education system. So everywhere we can see that there are some similarity between the system in Manus and the system in Australian other Western societies. So, in the universities, we can see that many of the academics and researchers, the system just force them just to make money for the university and actually take their freedom, take their identity. And so that's why, and many people in the universities, just I'm giving this example, the university, that many people really are not happy and they feel that the system, the university has control on them and take their identity, take their freedom. And they feel they are not free people while they are working, create too much stress, too much problem for them. So that, this concept help us to understand other part of the society in Australia and other Western countries. But what I claim in this book is that the main vision of hierarchical system is in Manus. So it is extreme version of this system is in Manus, exists in Manus. So for understanding the other part of the society, the best way is that we understand Manus prison system. The way that they force people to stay in the line, in the queue to get an orange for 2 hours. The way that force people to stay in the line for get a razor for 2 hours, to have shower, for everything. So they force the detainees to stay in the line the hours and hours each day, and also they call them as a number. And so also they put them through a very bureaucratic system, bureaucratic process. And we can see in the, the similarity in the other part of the society. When you want to go to hospital, when you are sick, you should try to make appointment, get appointment. Then they will, the system force you. Just over there I read something about disability community in Australia and how their life became harder over the past 4 years and 5 years. So what I want to say is that the government has learned a lot from this exile policy, has learned a lot from this prison system, and they practiced for years and years, and now they are spreading this system and develop this system and expand this system to out of the society. And they are running the Australian society as a camp, as a prison camp in so many ways. So, you know, I have many examples, so I can share with you, but I think you know, I talk a lot, so let's Omid to
Well, I'm going to pick up on
continue.
your point, Behrouz, and go to Omid on this, because in the book, Omid, you make some reflections at the end, and you reflect on who the real prisoners are and who really has freedom of mind. And it's a challenging proposition for the reader.
I actually developed that tale, that example, from some of the research that I do in philosophy about knowledge and the way that knowledge is associated with the position that you're in, your location, your standpoint, your relationship to others. So people who are locked up in Manus Island experience Australia in a very particular way. They see what Australia as a collective is capable of. If you were to ask people in Australia, individual citizens, would you inflict systematic torture on people seeking asylum here? Would you be able to put someone in a room and put them through this kind of punishment, constantly torment them, watch them ask for help, ask for assistance, and then increase the pressure? I'm willing to say that there are very, very few people who would actually do it. But why is it, as a collective, as a community, as a nation, this sort of thing is allowed to happen and intensify at such a really in such a really brutal way? So that thought experiment, that example, shows that essentially the people in Manus Island, they can see something about settler colonialism, settlers in Australia, that we as settlers can't see. There is a special knowledge in Manus Island, and that's something that is extremely important about the book. The book is pedagogical, it's educative. The book creates new knowledge for us. There's something that refugees who have been subject to our policies, subject to our harsh treatment, can tell us about ourselves. And in many ways, settlers in Australia become the prisoners. We're the ones whose creativity, we're the ones whose possibilities for creating knowledge, we're the ones whose ambitions for freedom are being stunted. In fact, we need to start seeing ourselves as part of that collective that's torturing people.
Behrouz, you're in fact bearing witness, as Omid refers there, to what is basically contemporary Australian policy. And you actually write that Manus Prison, this place, is Australia itself. Can you explain a little bit more what you mean when you say this is Australia itself?
Yeah, you know, first thing that we should recognize and acknowledge is that Manus Prison and Nauru just didn't come up suddenly, you know, in an empty place. They definitely relate to the history of colonialism in Australia and the history of Australia and political culture in Australia. So if you read about Australian history, modern history, we can see that there are similarity, and we can see many twins in the past century between Manus and Nauru and what's happened in the history of Australia. So definitely this prison camps came from the history of Australia. And, I should ask Omid to translate this word. Omid, ناخودآگاه چی میشه به انگلیسی؟
Unconscious.
Yeah. So
Unconscious.
I want to say that is, of Australia. So Manus Prison and Nauru. So Manus and Nauru definitely are a part of Australia and are established by Australia and running by Australia and Australian political culture. And no one can say and claim that we are separate from Australia. And just I want to give you some example, some political example. that how keeping people in Manus and Nauru and continue to this policy has a negative, deep negative impact on Australia. These days in Australia, people talk about this, that the Labour Party is not a real opposition, and they are defensive in front of Liberal Party, and they follow what the Liberal Party want and is doing. But I want to say this: the first time that Labour started to be defensive in front of Liberal Party was about this policy. For years and years, the Labour Party having Liberal Party in the parliament, and they, made many laws and they passed many bills against us. And they always say that we support what the government is doing, and they were defensive. And now we can see that they are defensive in other fields, in tax, in economy, in environment, in many things. But the first time that happened was about this policy. And also, someone like Peter Dutton, you can see that these days, he and his department raid the journalist, the ABC office, and they collect the information, which was very strange in a liberal democracy. But that happened before in Manus and Nauru 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 4 years ago, that they prevented the journalists to have access to these prison camps, and they prevented the media to have access to the right information. And because of the national security, they say it's because of the national security. We don't want to share this information. We don't want that people of Australia know how we spend $9 billion in Manus and Nauru. Omid is an example. Omid wanted to visit me last month, and they deported him. They didn't let him to come here, and they deported many journalists. That the first thing that happened was in Manus and Nauru. The first thing that threatened the freedom of speech was in Manus and Nauru for years and years. And now we can see that they, always I use this term, that the dictatorship is like a cancer. If you don't prevent it, it's, expand to other part of the body. And we can see that first that happened in Manus and Nauru. So what is happening here? There is a dictatorship. There is a secrecy around this policy for years and years. And still, people of Australia don't know what is really happening here. Sometimes I think, if I wouldn't write this book and I wouldn't write how people knew about this system, but now we have these materials and other people who work on this subject. So just I want to say that, of course, Manus and Nauru are a part of Australia. And what I gave you, what I explained, it was only some political example, but definitely there is your political culture and the way, the humanity, the morality, and some values, some principles that Australia always proud of it, and always say that, we are a privileged country, that we have this system, we have the democracy culture in this country, that deeply affect on that. And now, 2 years ago, I remember that someone like Peter Dutton said that he asked Australian people, please don't show compassion to these people in Manus and Nauru. He asked people to be cruel, and which is that is a real danger for a society like Australia. So I am telling that. I am telling that. So definitely what is happening here, the system here is a real dictatorship system. So someone like me, I was born in a dictatorship system, a religious dictatorship system. I grew up in that system and I left my country because of that system. And I know what is dictatorship system is. And when I came here, I didn't came here. They exiled me here. So I saw another kind of dictatorship system, a new kind of fascism in Manus and Nauru. So that's why, you know, someone like me, now I am living between a religious dictatorship system, so I cannot go back to that place. And now I cannot go to Australia, so I don't know where should I go, you know? And I am not, so it's easy that people say that go back to your country. Of course, it is an easy thing to say that, but we cannot go back. I cannot go back to that religious dictatorship system because I'm not a religious person. I cannot live in that system. So right now I am living in a situation like this. So I think it's very complicated, and in some ways it's simple. Definitely Manus and Nauru are part of Australia, and you know, we should never forget that we committed no crime. We committed no crime.
Behrouz is saying that he's committed no crime, and other asylum seekers held in Nauru and Manus have committed no crime. But they've certainly been criminalised by our politicians on both sides. They've been demonised and they've been dehumanised. Omid, you mentioned to me just a little earlier... Behrouz, if I could just ask Omid a quick question. Omid, a bit earlier you said to me that no politician has ever uttered Behrouz's name. I found that quite telling, because to say his name is to acknowledge him, and in a way that sort of unravels the approach that they've taken.
I think this is a really interesting conversation, and I'm glad you raised it. I think one thing that is really helpful is to think about Manus and Nauru as laboratories. What's happened over the last 6 years has affected Australia in such a way that it's reduced our capacity to be compassionate. And one of the ways that throughout history, dictatorships, oppressive regimes have done that is with the use of language. And you can see it happening in Manus and Nauru, or in all detention centres actually, by using numbers, using false concepts, such as the term illegal, you know, queue jumper, referring to people as criminals, unauthorised, exactly. And there are a whole range of different terms that are created to basically criminalise people who the government feels are undesirable. Now, what's interesting is that with literature, Behrouz has done something really special. He's put the politicians in the corner. He's put them in detention, in other words. He's put them in a double bind. So they can either ignore Behrouz, which is what they're doing. They just become now the subject of satire, and also open the door for Behrouz to do almost anything he likes in terms of his creativity, his intellectual work, his reporting. But if they mention his name, if they take the other approach and they name him, they attack him, they talk about him in terms of critique, or to exclude him or marginalise him or stigmatise him, suddenly MEG 45 becomes a human being. Suddenly we start to see a face, we start to see a personality, we see a history, we see another human being who has capacity, who has dignity, who has identity, the same as us. And this is, I think, one of the reasons why the major politicians won't mention his name, because they realise that intellectually, psychologically, Australia will start to see these people who they've criminalised in a different light.
In a way, the book gives visibility to invisible people, to Australia. And I think what's quite amazing about the book is that you are Behrouz takes you by the hand and puts you in that detention centre, in that prison. He puts you on that white chair, you've got your feet on the fence, you're looking outside into the jungle, you can hear the ocean, you can smell the place. He lets you smell the place, hear the place, you see the colours, and it's a very sensory experience, I found, with the book. But it's a story about survival rather than, you know, some sort of romantic notion about what's happening in those prisons. How important is it to give those people in that detention centre that voice, to make them people?
I think what the magic of what Behrouz does in this book, the depth of the book comes in this multi-layered approach and creating characters that completely disrupt all the kind of stereotypes and the classifications and the binaries that exist when it comes to refugees. So, for instance, Behrouz doesn't depict refugees as saints. No. He also doesn't represent them as evil the way that the government does. He doesn't criminalise them. He presents them as human beings like us, people with hopes and dreams, aspirations, with special qualities, and with their flaws. He's at length he talks about how the system has created a situation where people start to hate each other, people start to work against each other. And this is I guess the foundation of the hierarchical system that he's talking about, a system that's designed to pit people against each other. And it's not just in the detention centre, it happens in our own societies, it happens in our workplaces, it happens in our schools. You know, this is the system he's talking about is a system that pervades Australian society, culture, politics, economy. So I think what's important about Behrouz's book is that it shows this complex side of refugees, and what's more important is that somebody like me, for instance, can't occupy the position of saviour. And Behrouz is not the victim here. I'm not helping him. In fact, he's guiding me. He's teaching me. He's opening up spaces. He's breaking down this kind of opposition or polar opposition between victim, saviour, recipient, supporter, beneficiary, benefactor. So there's a whole new way of talking about the relationship between people on the border, people inside, and it creates a whole new language.
Behrouz, this is really, and all of your activities are an act of resistance, ultimately. One of the important things that comes across in the book is the significance attached to names, and you, in a way, rename the official language from the government and name it for what you believe it is.
Yeah, I think, already I say that this whole system designed to take our identity and reduce us to just some number and mechanize us. So what I wanted to do is that I rename people and I give them some names in a poetic way. So they are not simple names. The names in the book and the characters in the book, I named them in a poetic way to challenge this system and the challenge of, the language of this system. And, I think it's not only in the book, in my journalism works and articles, you can see that I don't use the language of the government. For example, they call this place offshore processing centers, which is a very, stupid name. Offshore processing center, it means that they are processing us. So we are here for 6 years. How you are processing us, for 6 years? So what I did, is that in my journalism works and in my, the book and movie and all of my works, I try to create the kind of language, a new kind of language to represent us. And that's why I don't use the language of the, media and other journalists, and I created some new kind of some concepts. For example, I call this policy exile policy. I introduce political hostages because, we are hostages here, They don't let us go to other countries. They don't let us go to Australia, and it is a political hostages. I introduce some words like systematic torture, some words like, the hierarchical system. And so that's why I think even I try to introduce the refugees, the people here, in a way that they are human. They are not angel, because I believe that the human rights defenders and the advocates look at the refugees and they want to see the refugees in a romantic way. And in other side, the right-wing people, racist people, look at the refugees and put them alongside, something like criminal, rapists, dangerous people, terrorists. So what I try is to describe the refugees like human, like you, and like others. They are not angel and they are not evil. They are human. They are human and we are human, with different background, different culture, different personality and characters. So that thing, I'm working in this way. So that's why I think many people don't like my works, because, my works create some challenge. So the people used to see the refugees in a particular way for years and years, for decades, and now suddenly someone came up and said, "No, you should challenge that picture, challenge that window, challenge that perspective." And that's why I think, most of time I make people feel uncomfortable. And I think, which is good, because if I don't make people feel uncomfortable, it means that I am not in the right way. So just I'm repeating other words that people already did. So that's why I think it is a long way, and I don't claim that I want to change this system, and I'm only one person, and but of course it will take time, but many people, many academics and researchers engage with this works and with these materials, and we are working with them, and hopefully and we are working in the education system. So this book, the academics are teaching this book in some of the universities, and it is a long way. So just we are working. And just one thing I want to mention, sorry, I talk a lot, about what the question you asked from Omid, that the politician don't want to, recognize me or mention my name. I think I believe in that. Sorry, the way I am talking is like I am a selfish person, but it is reality. It is my understanding that they scare. They are scared because they think if they mention my name, they give me power, and they recognize me that I am exist. They want to, and we are exist. I'm not talking about myself. The refugees in Manus Island, Nauru, we exist, and they cannot deny that we exist, and they cannot deny us, and even, thank you, even someone like me never go to Australia, still I am a part of Australia. I have participated in events. I am exist in the libraries. I am exist in the cinemas. I am exist in the universities, and even I and other refugees never go to Australia and go to other countries. Still, we are a part of Australia, and no one is able to deny that.
It's a very good
You
point.
know,
In fact,
someone like Peter Dutton that
Omid,
he is only a politician. So yeah, you know, one day he will lose his power, but still we exist, and no one is able to do that. And I think it is you know, the way the refugees in Manus Island and Nauru resist in front of this system and say that we exist in different ways. So I'm only one of them. So just today I had this opportunity to talk with you, but there are many people here who already show that we are human and they cannot deny us.
Omid, as Behrouz is talking about there, this gives visibility to people who have been, a government has tried to make invisible. It also restores respect. Ultimately, it's a record that cannot be erased now, isn't it? How did you feel as being part of this project? I mean, this is chronicling Australia's history.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to the point that I made earlier that this victim-savior binary doesn't exist in this collaboration that I'm involved in with Behrouz. In many ways, I feel extremely privileged. I feel honoured to be part of this. I realised from the very beginning that the work I was doing, from the very first time I read Behrouz's work in that Guardian article, I realised that this was making an enormous contribution to Australian history, to Australian literature, to basically the notion of justice or the development of justice in Australia. What Behrouz is doing, it goes against this idea of denying the historical injustices, the transgenerational trauma, the deeply embedded culture of or character of colonialism in the country. So Behrouz is basically adding to that tradition, adding to that form of resistance, and also helping Australia heal. You know, in order to move forward, we need to accept the fact that these sorts of things are part of Australian history and politics and culture. So I remember when I first received his book, from I think the second or third page, I realised that I was reading a masterpiece. And I knew that this was the sort of thing that people would be reading for generations to come and be reflecting on. And I think that now they've been in the prison for 6 years. And we knew that the book wasn't going to change anything in terms of policy. We were realistic about that. We knew that this book wouldn't free anyone from the detention centre, from the prison. But we knew that this was going to affect the next generation. And I think it's created a rupture, it's created a split, and I think it's the responsibility of everyone who realises this kind of injustice, realises the colonial nature or the colonial logic that's deeply embedded in border politics here, to actually take that gap or take that rupture and split it apart and really initiate transformation. So Behrouz has done his work. He's created his book. He's given it to us. He's contributed to history. He's changed the literary scene. He's changed the political narrative. It's our responsibility now to occupy that space.
We're fast running out of time, so Omid, if you don't mind, I'd like to wrap up with a couple of direct questions around the current situation, particularly on Manus Island with Behrouz. Behrouz, you spent nearly 4 years in Manus prison, and you're now in the East Lorengau Refugee Centre. I think 2017 was when you were all forcibly moved to that centre. Can you explain to us now how many refugees are on Manus today and what life is like now?
Yeah, thank you very much for raising this. I think it's important. But before I answer this question, I think I should acknowledge all of the Australians, all of the people in Australia who have been uh, working against this barbaric policy, and they rejected this kind of cruelty, and they have supported innocent people in Manus and Nauru for years and years. I think it's important. And so that's why many people say that, why are you working against our country? I say, I am not working against your country. Many people of Australia support these works, and we are a part of a movement. We are a part of a social movement, and we are working. Even I don't want to go to Australia, but everywhere that I go, I work to make the society and the world a better place. So that's why I'm not working against Australia. Many of Australian people are supporting us, and I think it's important that I acknowledge them, and always I proud of these people and those people who reject, this cruel policy. So about the current situation, I think right now. We are the government says that we are 450 people in PNG, and 350 people in Nauru. But it is one of another lies. They are lying. We are less than that. Right now in Manus Island, we are less than 140 people. Before we were 800 people, but now we are less than 140 people, and about 250 people are in Port Moresby. So they keep them. They are sick. They keep them in the some motels and locked up them there, and they cannot go out, and they have limitation. But they are keeping them there. So we are less than 50 people in total in Port, and in Nauru people are less than 250 people. So we are not too many people, and so what's happened in Manus is that when I think you should be you are agree with me that most of people expected in Australia, and even the Prime Minister Scott Morrison, he expected that Labor wins, and we expected that Labor wins the election, and they accept the New Zealand offer, and we go to New Zealand. So we were very hopeful, but unfortunately, so the election became like that. So that affects on the refugees on Manus Island, and so then people started to suicide, self-harm, and we recorded more than 100 times self-harm and suicide attempts in less than 2 months. But now we have a Medivac law, so which is a law that, if you remember, before the election, the government was a minority government in the parliament. So we used that moment, and we passed a bill, Medivac, called Medivac, and they must send sick refugees to Australia to get medical treatment. And now this law exists, and the process is working, and so that's why we should be hopeful until November. So we have only 3 months time that more people go to Australia, and the number of people become, we expect that the number of people become less than 150 on November. because the government is going to change the law. So we don't know what will happen on November, but they are going to change this law. But right now that I'm talking with you, I think many people have been, transferring to Australia, and we should be hopeful that more people go to Australia. So, but the current situation is that just people are depressed. Really, people are depressed, and they don't go out. They are living in their room, and so the whole
Behrouz,
situation is
the
this. The important thing is
Papua New Guinea has the new Prime Minister, and he has been pressing Australia for a timetable for resettlement. Do you draw any hope from this new leader and what he might be able to achieve with the Australian government?
Unfortunately, our experience is that the PNG politician, actually the political system in PNG is a corrupt system, and obviously is a corrupt system, and the politicians, when they already asked the Australian government to close this place and release people. But the problem is that when they ask that and when they say that, they want to get some money from Australia and just forget about it. So that is problem. But we don't know the current Prime Minister is, serious or not. We should wait. It seems that he is serious, but still I think it's, we should wait. But the Australian government never care about what the PNG government wants. So that's why I call it a classical colonialist policy. They have been using this island for their political benefits for 6 years, and they don't care about the local people and the politicians. So still, I think we don't know that this Prime Minister, the new one, is serious or not. So just we should wait. But our experience, we experience many politicians who already say that, but they just gave them some money and finished.
Behrouz, we've run out of time for our particular session, but we do have a little bit of extra time for questions from the audience. We have two people, I think, with microphones. If you'd like to put your hand up, if you'd like to ask either Behrouz or Omid a question. And it'd be great if you could just keep it to a question rather than a statement at this stage.
Hi, I have two questions. The first one is just about people who have been advocating for the rights of refugees in Australia, and if you have any perspectives or advice to make our work the most effective. And the second one was just about the role of nature in your work, like particularly the letter from Manus Island. I was very much struck by describing people occupying the camp, turning to nature and the ecosystem, and whether that's always been a part of your political philosophy or something that's come out of your experience on Manus Island. So you don't have to answer both, maybe you can just choose.
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. So before the election, I said today morning we had another event, and someone asked, raise the same thing, about what the refugee advocates should do and what we should do to help. I think, I to repeat the answer. So before the election, we had many events, almost every day. So 2 months before the election, and our events, were like a part of the election campaign. So in all of the events, just when people ask me this question, I say that don't vote for liberals and reject them. But so unfortunately that happened. So right now, really, it's really hard to answer this question. So I'm not in a position to tell people what they should do. But what I say is that after 6 years, that the civil society in Australia and the movement in Australia and people who have been supporting us in so many, and we couldn't change, and we rethought the way we are advocating, the way we are challenging this system. So, like doing protests, donate to the organization, this kind of thing didn't work. So it is the time we think about different kind of advocacy. So that's why, I think it is the time that people think about this, that just, I remember 5 years ago, the protests for the rallies in a city like Sydney, 1,000 people were in the rally, and now after 6 years, still 1,000 people. So I think we should think about this, that we should do something, we should create some new thing to challenge this system. So that didn't work, that didn't work. So we should change our ways. So, I just can't say that. And about the nature, I think nature, we came from the nature. And in the book, let me say it in a different words. In front of the hierarchical system in Manus or in Australia or everywhere, I think the best way is that we rely on nature and we, use the ecosystem and, ecology and earth. We should rely on nature to just feel freedom. And so I think it's important. So in the book, you can see that, nature is the main part of the book, and the way people rely on the nature and, feel freedom even inside the prison camp.
Omid, do you have a reflection on that point about nature?
For me, what was really striking about Behrouz's connection with nature was his how he drew on his Kurdish heritage. So the title of the book, No Friend But the Mountains, is a very famous Kurdish saying. In Kurdistan, in the Middle East, the Kurds are surrounded by a lot of antagonistic forces. Arabs, Persians, Turks, other people. And for hundreds of years, they've been defending themselves, defending their land. And when they've been under attack, they retreat to the mountains. They find sanctuary. They seek asylum in the mountains. And that's where they find protection, and that's where they mobilize and regroup. And I think what's important is that the mountains are not just a source of protection, but also a source of inspiration and spirituality for them as well. So Behrouz is an indigenous person to that particular region. So when he was exiled to Manus Island, he saw how important land and country and the ecosystem was, and he could identify with the Manusian people and could see how colonial forces were using their land, using it as a place to detain unwanted people. So I think for me, this connection with nature has more than just a spiritual or inspirational dimension. It's ontological. It's something very essentially human and also very particular to Behrouz's form of resistance.
Okay. Do we have another question? Gentleman in the middle. Oh, lady in the middle. Oh, gentleman.
Hi there. Behrouz, first I just want to say thank you so much for doing what you're doing. Please keep it up. The question that I have is about the hierarchical system. So I understand that Manus is the epitome of the hierarchical system. But you also say that Manus didn't come out of nowhere. So I wonder, what do you think the seeds are for the hierarchical system in Australian history?
Pardon, I couldn't understand the last part.
Behrouz, what are the seeds? ریشه های سیستم حاکم چی هست? What are the seeds for it?
Yeah, I think we should have, I don't know the roots of this system, but I think we should go deep and deep in the history, and we can see that, the history of not only in Australia, in Western countries and other countries, you can see that there are many different kind of camps, different kind of, so all of this history, actually develop a language, and this language is become bigger and bigger and more progressive, and developed this language and ended up in this system. So Manus prison system, we can say it is the new or modern version of other camps and other prison system, and or we can say a modern slavery. So just this. So I think you can see many similarity and find many twins in the history of Australia. And the recent one, you can see that, someone like Kevin Wright, he officially apologized for what they did for stolen generation. And exactly same person did that, and now many people here are separated with their families, did that in a different way. It is similar. So, they did this, and, they did it in a different way. So that's why I think the important thing is that we should recognize that, and first Australia should recognize that this system and this government did this, or is doing this. When we recognize this and put it in the education system and educate the young generation that, look, we already did this, we did this wrong thing, we already did this, and so perhaps we, don't see this kind of thing on future. But I think while the Australia and Australian people and the politicians don't recognize and don't accept this, I think nothing happens. So we can see on future that it will repeat again in a different way. So that's why I think the important thing is that we recognize this. And, in Germany, they accepted what they did in Second World War, and they are teaching the kids and children and the young generation so that they don't do it again. So I don't compare Manus, with what's happening.
Do we have a room for one more?
Second
We've got
World War.
Behrouz.
I never did that.
Sorry,
That.
Behrouz,
Just,
we've got one more question for you.
Hello, Bruce. I wanted to let people know that your video installation, Remain, is on here in Brisbane at the moment and will be on till the middle of September. So at the University of Queensland Art Museum, it has its own little theatre and it's on all the time and people can go and see it. So I wondered if you would like to say something about Remain and the extraordinary work you've done.
Yeah, thank you very much. I forgot that. So sometimes I forget that, where we have event. So I forgot exactly. I forgot. Yes, thank you very much for raising that. raising that. So our video installation is in the museum. So I think it's important that you go and see and watch it. So, you know, it is a video installation that we did after the illustration. So it is a great project because you can see the refugees, the people, you know, you can see them, you can feel them, you can, you know, feel human, and they are, you know, simple and complicated people like others. So I think it's important that if you watch it, yeah, thank you very much for raising that. So I would like to invite everyone to go and watch this video installation, which is a, you know, in my view, it is a great work, and it is a work that gives you some picture and imagination of refugees in Manus Island and Nauru.
Thank you, Behrouz. Well, unfortunately, we have run out of time, so I'm sure you'd agree this has been a fascinating and insightful conversation, and I think we've been given a lot to reflect on. Louise, I think, might have a few final words to farewell us with.
Really, my job is to thank Omid, Cathy and Behrouz, so can everyone give them a big hand?
Thank you.
I think we've all been made to feel, or I have anyway, uncomfortable and profoundly moved and inspired and encouraged. So I thank all of you for presenting today. I would like to remind you, for those of you who have not read No Friend But the Mountains, is for sale outside in the foyer, and you can get the book signed by Omid. Yeah, I hope you've enjoyed the evening, and we see you back at another State Library event. Thank you.
Thank you.